The sun had long dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the dust-choked streets of Dry Creek. At the edge of town, beneath the skeletal arms of gnarled mesquite trees, a lone figure leaned against a weathered post, his gaunt face shadowed and eyes sharp as flint. The murmurs of the townsfolk had been relentless, whispers laced with scorn, suspicion digging deeper each day as his footsteps echoed through the wooden boardwalks. Tonight, the air seemed charged, as if the earth itself held its breath, warning of storms yet to come. Dry Creek was a settlement carved from hardship, a patchwork of rattlesnake-flecked plains and rocky outcrops stretching into a merciless wilderness. Winds carried the scent of sagebrush and smoke, while distant coyotes yipped in the dark, reminders of the savagery lurking beyond clothes and civility. The wooden shacks leaned wearily against each other, faces lit by flickering lanterns, shadows crawling over peeling paint and sagging porches. Here, distrust was currency, and old fears of the Apache ran like poison in the veins of the townsfolk. Amid this unforgiving backdrop stood a woman named Clara, her spirit as unwavering as the towering cliffs nearby. She had borne the weight of the town's cold shoulder ever since she defied their judgment, not with bandaged wounds or guns drawn, but by pledging her life to a man they branded with fear. Her husband, an Apache whose past was as enigmatic as the desert nights. Clara's resolve was a quiet defiance, her every step a challenge against the narrow minds that saw only threat behind his calm gaze. Tonight, the tension that had simmered beneath polite avoidance and cutting sneers now boiled close to the surface. The town's prejudice was a wall Clara faced daily, but more pressing was the unease that had crept into her husband's eyes. Something she could not yet name whispered between them, a secret lurking beneath layers of silence, hidden from even her most probing questions. What was the truth he carried? And what storm was it destined to bring? The unease exploded when a ragged rider burst into town, his horse hooves pounding like thunder against the dusty earth. Word spread swiftly that the U.S. Cavalry Patrol was scouting nearby, and suspicion sharpened into accusation. Eyes darted toward Clara and her husband. Fingers pointed in hushed counsel. Would the man she loved slip quietly beneath their gaze, or would the dark rumors claw him out? Into the open, igniting old hatreds into fierce blaze once more. In the shadows of her modest home, Clara watched the horizon tremble with approaching hooves, each beat a warning drum against her courage. Her husband's stoic mask cracked for a fleeting moment, the heavy burden of his concealed past writ clear in the tightening of his jaw. The fragile sanctuary they'd built was trembling on the edge of collapse, ready to shatter as the town's grudges threatened to ignite. Then, in the twilight, as the sounds drew nearer, Clara caught a glimpse through the narrow crack of the door, not the stern faces of uniformed men, but silhouettes cloaked in familiar patterns, shapes that spoke of an identity far removed from what Dry Creek had condemned. Her breath caught, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. The true nature of the man they mocked was about to step out from shadows, forcing everyone to confront the shattering truth. Before this story's next chapter unfolds, a warning reaches your soul. Many travelers along this unforgiving frontier know well how easily the trail can vanish. The relentless hand of fate, or the inscrutable algorithm of time, ready to erase your path without a whisper. Take a moment now. Beneath the screen lies a lifeline, an invitation to secure your place among those who follow this saga. Confirm your subscription. Do not let the thread of this tale slip away. Join us and stand ready when the next twist unveils the man behind the mask. The night air thickened as the shadows cloaked the figures standing on the outskirts of Dry Creek. Clara's breath, caught, trapped between hope and fear as she peered through the slit in the door. Those shapes whispered a language stubborn as the desert winds, a silent truth that dared to break through the town's endless suspicion. Her husband's eyes flickered with something unreadable. A battle raging quietly behind his calm facade. The silhouettes stepped into the fading light, revealing worn leather and beadwork, their presence a living testament against the lies that hung heavy over the village. The world Clara had condemned herself to defend now pressed itself against the door. Patients of the same unyielding land, yet strangers in Dry Creek's unforgiving judgment. She felt the walls around her home tremble, not from the approaching footsteps, but from the fragile barrier between fear and understanding. Her husband moved silently, a shadow among shadows, as he met the small band's approach, each face marked by trials etched by the relentless sun, each bearing stories heavier than their whispered secrets. They carried no weapons drawn in threat, but the weight of centuries in cautious glances, the unspoken history between their people and the world beyond the arroyo. Clara's heart pounded anew, recognizing the lines of kinship written in their posture, the same burden she had seen in her husband's eyes since their first shared dawn. The eldest among them stepped forward, a woman, her hair streaked with gray like the stones scattered across the Dry Creek bed. Her gaze held the grit of a life lived in the balance between survival and surrender. Without a word, she extended a hand to Clara's husband, a gesture heavy with unspoken fellowship and delicate as a whispered prayer. The town's rumors whirled in Clara's mind, clashing with the present reality, the gentle strength in that touch unraveling the fabric of fear woven tightly over years. Inside, Clara's hands clenched into trembling fists. She had dared to dream that her marriage might forge a path beyond suspicion. Yet the arrival of these visitors unraveled new threads of unknown consequence. Who were they in the shadowed war still alive beyond Dry Creek? And what old ghosts had they resurrected tonight? Her husband's jaw tightened, voice low and steady as he replied in the ancient tongue, the words echoing with the weight of ancestral lands and promises yet to be fulfilled. Clara caught just enough to know this was more than a simple reunion. It was a summons, a reckoning. As the strangers settled beneath the mesquite trees, their quiet murmurs became an undercurrent beneath the brittle stillness of the town. From the porches, crooked eyes watched, narrowing further, sharpening to spears of suspicion. The patrol of the cavalry remained a shadow, hovering beyond the hills, tension wound tighter than a bowstring, ready to snap. The quiet gathering was a challenge, carved into the landscape itself, a pulse stroking the edges of Dry Creek's fragile peace. Clara stepped outside, her figure cutting a resolute silhouette against the dying light. The town held its breath, the murmur of voices ceasing under the weight of her presence. She met the gaze of the elder woman, steady and unflinching, bridging worlds with a strength born of unyielding desert winds. There was no need for pleasantries, only the slow weaving of a fragile trust, the understanding. Forged through silent recognition of battles, both past and yet to come, her husband's eyes softened, catching the glimmer of something Clara dared not name. A hope that surged beneath the scars of history, a fragile peace looming on the horizon. Yet beneath that stirring, a dark warning brewed. The cavalry's arrival was no mere coincidence, but a harbinger. Dry Creek's only chance to survive lay in choosing between fear and alliance. Old grudges, once buried, now clawed their way back, threatening to ignite an inferno none would walk away from unscathed. The elder whispered again, a fragment of prophecy carried on cracked lips. A betrayal, closer than the town, yet colder than the desert night, loomed beneath the guise of protectors. Clara's heart faltered, the weight of her choice pressing heavier than the desert sun at noon. She glanced back toward their home, toward the fragile sanctuary that might soon become a battlefield. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the quiet. A scout burst into the clearing, eyes wide with the terror of what he'd seen beyond the ridge. His voice shook the still night as he stumbled over ragged words. The cavalry is no longer scouting. They're hunting. They want him. They want all of you. The gathering stiffened, breaths held tight in chests pounding like thunder. Clara's husband shifted, muscles coiled beneath weathered skin, his calm replaced by a dangerous fire. The fragile line between hunter and hunted blurred, and Dry Creek's shadows grew heavy with impending violence. Clara reached for his hand, voice barely a whisper. "We cannot let them tear us apart. Not tonight." But even as she spoke, the distant clang of metal and the harsh whispers of booted feet echoed on the wind. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. The elder woman's eyes met Clara's once more, solemn and fierce. There are those in Dry Creek who will see only enemies, but they do not decide how this story ends. And then, from the darkness beyond the mesquite, a single figure emerged, familiar, yet unrecognizable in the flickering lantern glow. A man, draped in the regiment's tattered blue, his badge tarnished, but his eyes burning with a secret that could shatter the fragile hope of the night. Clara's breath caught sharp in her throat as the man stepped between her and the visitor's circle, his voice low and accusing. "You harbor a fugitive. That's a charge you cannot escape." The wind stilled. In that moment, the fragile sanctuary collapsed. The lines drawn in sand became a battleground for hearts and history, where loyalty, fear, and love would collide beneath the unforgiving stars. And somewhere deeper still, beneath the layers of dust and dawn, a darker truth stirred, one that threatened not only the man at Clara's side, but the very soul of Dry Creek itself. The mesquite branches swayed in the growing darkness, shadows flickering like restless spirits over the cracked earth. Clara's heart pounded in time with the distant hoofbeats that grew louder, more insistent. The ragged figures beneath the trees had revealed themselves, cloaked in the pride and pain of a people long wronged. The elder woman's steady gaze held Clara's. It was a silent tether, binding their fates tighter than the noose of suspicion that strangled Dry Creek. Her husband's jaw clenched, muscles coiling beneath the weathered skin, as if bracing against a rising storm. The ancient words he spoke rolled from his tongue with cautious weight, weaving a thread back through time and blood. A summons to those marked by shadows deeper than the night. His voice was steady, but Clara saw the fire sparking in his eyes, not anger, but the fierce resolve of a man embracing the burden he had carried in silence. The murmurs around the fire softened, the town's cold eyes peeking from porches and lantern-lit windows growing sharper, yet more uncertain. They had come expecting threats. Instead, they found kinship, an unspoken challenge to their narrow fears. The elder woman's hand, rough and calloused, rested briefly on Clara's husband's shoulder, a gesture quiet but heavy with meaning. It spoke of battles survived, of desperate hope threaded through broken promises. Clara's pulse quickened. The fragile sanctuary she had carved beside the man she loved was no longer a place to hide, but a battleground where loyalty would be carved from suspicion and the steel of survival. The distant clatter of spurs and the whisper of boots against packed dirt signaled the approach of darker forces. The cavalry no longer prowled the hills as scouts, but hunted like predators, closing in on their prey. A harsh cry shattered the uneasy calm. A scout burst through the gathering shadows, eyes wild with terror, breath ragged. "They're coming," he shouted, voice shaking like dry leaves in a storm. Not merely searching, hunting, for him, for all of you. His words ignited a spark that flared into a wildfire of tension. The elder woman exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Clara's husband. His calm resolve fractured, replaced by a storm barely contained beneath the surface. Muscles tensed as if ready to spring, eyes darting toward the town's darkened streets. The threat was no longer distant. It pressed close, tightening like a noose with every heartbeat. Clara stepped forward into the cool night air, the worn dirt crunching beneath her boots. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady but laced with desperation. "We cannot let fear unravel everything. Not tonight, not here." But even as the words left her lips, the sound of iron boot heels echoed near, uneven, harsh, a proclamation of intent. A figure emerged from the mesquite's twisted shadows. A man wrapped in tattered blue, his uniform faded and stained, his badge dulled with neglect. His eyes, burning with a secret none wished to face, locked onto Clara and her husband. He spoke low, voice serrated with accusation. "You harbor a fugitive. That's a charge no one here can ignore." The quiet shattered. Lanterns flickered as faces turned, suspicion sharpening into something raw and irrepressible. The thin line between neighbor and enemy blurred, the weight of old wounds pressing down like the desert's unforgiving sun. Clara's breath hitched as her husband stepped between her and the accuser, his silhouette a shield against the gathering storm. A flicker of something fierce and ancient flickered across his features. Not just defiance, but a warning locked deep in bones tied to a land scorched by betrayal. Eyes in the crowd narrowed, fists clenched in shadows where whispered curses danced. The tension hummed, an invisible thread, threatening to snap and spew flames across Dry Creek's fragile peace. Then, without warning, the elder woman raised a hand, her voice cutting through the rising tumult like a sharpened blade. "You do not speak for us. This man carries the honor of his people, not the sins the cavalry sees." Her words hung heavy, a summons to courage or doom. Suddenly, the stillness of the night fractured as a sharp shot rang out, slicing the air with ruthless precision. A bullet drilled into the earth, mere feet from where Clara stood, sending a plume of dust spiraling upward. Screams followed, sharp cries of pain and confusion, mingled with the harsh rattle of guns loading for another round. Clara's instincts flared. She grabbed her husband's arm, the leather of his sleeve rough beneath her. "Fingers. We have no time," she whispered. "They're already here. We must move." He nodded, fierce and unyielding. "Everyone not willing to stand with us must leave now," he warned. "This fight will burn through anything in its path." As the first patrol emerged from the edge of town, faces grim and guns drawn, Clara's eyes locked once more with the elders. The lines between friend and foe were dissolving in the dust-choked twilight. Amid the chaos, a sudden figure broke from the crowd. A young boy, no older than 10, clutching a worn leather pouch close to his chest. His eyes gleamed with desperation and a secret only known to him. Without a word, he darted past the menacing soldiers, vanishing toward the hills, with the silent promise of a truth that could change everything. Clara's breath caught. The boy, he carries the key. Her husband's gaze hardened, ancient wisdom flashing beneath the surface. They hunt more than flesh and blood tonight. They hunt the past. The patrol commander barked orders, his voice echoing with cold certainty, unaware that the war about to engulf Dry Creek reached far beyond the man they sought, or the whispers that haunted the night. And as the cavalry surged forward, the ground trembling beneath them, a darker shape moved with deadly purpose through the shadows, a figure cloaked in black, eyes burning with intent that chilled the earth itself. Silent as death, he carried with him a secret so brutal, so close to the heart of this fragile town, that if revealed, nothing would ever be the same. Clara staggered back, the air torn from her lungs. In the silence that followed, broken only by distant gunfire and the wind's mournful howl, she heard the voice, a whisper carried just beyond reach, of betrayal closer than any horizon. The night was no longer only alive. It was a living nightmare waiting to claim them all. The mesquite branches swayed with the restless wind, shadows twisting like ghostly fingers over the cracked earth. Clara's breath hitched as those figures drew closer, barely silhouettes now, their leather and beadwork catching the fading light. The elder woman stepped forward, her eyes locked on Clara's husband with a solemn gravity that spoke louder than any greeting. Without a word, her hand reached out, rough, calloused, but steady, pressing a silent call into the weathered shoulder of the Apache man. He met her touch, the weight of unspoken years pressing between them. Clara felt a tremor ripple through her chest, a mix of hope and dread coiling tight like the desert dusk around them. This moment was fragile, as easily shattered as the dry ground beneath their feet. A hard dirt crunch echoed behind her, and Clara's fingers instinctively curled tighter around the rough wood of the doorframe. The tension thickened with every breath as the distant hoofbeats grew sharper, closer. The cavalry was no longer scouting. They were hunting them. Inside, Clara caught the flicker that crossed her husband's face, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, the flash of fire igniting behind his calm mask. Years of silence and secrets found their first cruel ripple. His voice came low and measured, but it carried an ancient power as he answered the elder woman's summons in the language of their ancestors, words that seemed to carry the burden of entire generations. The murmurs around the encampment softened in awe, but outside the fragile circle of kinship, Dry Creek's suspicion twisted like a serpent coiled ready to strike. Faces peered out from porches and shuttered windows, eyes narrow and full of disdain. Clara's heart twisted. The sanctuary, built in whispered promises, felt less like a refuge and more like a spark on parched brush, ready to flare and consume all. The elder woman's gaze shifted from Clara's husband to Clara herself. Though no words passed between them, the weight of understanding settled heavy. The path ahead was lined with peril. Alliances had to be forged with care, their edges sharp against the ever-present threat lurking beyond those mesquite shadows. Then, as the night grew darker, a sudden voice shattered the tense quiet, a scout breaking through the brush with terror haunting his eyes. "They're coming," he gasped, voice ragged and trembling. "The cavalry, them and their wrath, they're hunting now. For him, for all of us." A collective breath caught and held. Clara's husband shifted, muscles tensed, taut. The calm resolve that once cloaked him now threatened to snap into something fierce, volcanic beneath the surface. Clara stepped forward from the safety of her home, boots crunching into the dirt. Her voice, clear and steady, despite the storm swelling in her chest, cut through the silence. "We cannot let fear unravel what we fought to protect. Not tonight, not here." The first hard clang of spurs sent a cold gust down her spine. Figures emerged from the darkness. Patrol soldiers, faces grim. Guns raised, but not yet fired. Among them stood a man draped in a tattered cavalry blue, his badge dulled, but not forgotten. His eyes locked on Clara and the gathering circle of visitors with an accusing fire. "You harbor a fugitive," he spat, voice like gravel. "That's a charge no one here can ignore." The night shattered. Lanterns flickered wildly as the town citizens stirred, suspicion igniting into hatred. A thin line between neighbor and enemy vanished under the heavy weight of history and fear. Clara's husband stepped forward, standing like a living barrier between her and the threat. His eyes blazed with something ancient, a fierce warning that went beyond words. The crowd closed in, a low murmur of threats and curses rising in the chilled air. Suddenly, the elder woman raised the hand, commanding silence. Her voice, sharp and unwavering, cut through the chaos like a blade. He carries the honor of his people, not the sins you accuse. Your guilt blinds you to truth. Before the weight of her words could settle, a sharp crack tore through the night, a bullet carving a cloud of dust at Clara's feet. Chaos erupted. Cries pierced the dark, guns cocked hurriedly, and panic bloomed like a wildfire. Clara grabbed her husband's arm, leather rough and familiar under her grip. "We have no time," she whispered. "They're here. We must move." His nod was fierce, unyielding. Those unwilling to stand with us should leave before the flames spread. The patrol advanced, spurs ringing, eyes hard as flint. Clara's glance flickered back to the elder woman, the unspoken understanding threading tighter. The battle being drawn was more than bullets and orders. It was a war of hearts, history, and survival. From the commotion, a sudden figure darted, small, desperate, a boy clutching a worn leather pouch close to him. His eyes gleamed with secrets no adult dared speak aloud. Without hesitation, he slipped past soldiers and shadows, vanishing into the western hills. Clara's voice caught. "The boy, he holds the key." Her husband's face darkened, ancient wisdom flickering beneath furrowed brows. "They hunt more than bodies tonight. They hunt our past." The captain barked orders, unknowing of the deeper war closing in. Behind the patrol's steady advance, a darker shadow crept, silent, deadly. Cloaked in night, eyes burning with cold intent, this figure moved like death incarnate, bearing a secret so close, so brutal, it could shatter the fragile trust and ignite Dry Creek's destruction. Clara staggered back, breath stolen by the weight of what lurked beyond the visible. In the ragged silence that followed, carried only by distant gunfire and the wind's low moan, a whispered voice curled into her ear, soft as a blade, sharp as betrayal. "Not all enemies wear the cavalry's blue." The mesquite branches swayed against the deepening black, shadows stretching long and restless across the cracked earth. Beneath their twisted limbs, the circle of visitors tightened, their murmurs a low thrum beneath the crisp night air. Clara stood back, breath caught between hope and dread. Her eyes flickered to the narrow crack of the door as the ragged signals of approaching hooves grew louder, echoing like thunderstorms rolling over the distant plains. Her husband's jaw clenched, the faintest tremor betraying the fierce calm that usually graced his weathered features. That ancient flame burned within, a slow and silent heat beneath the grit and dust. A fire fanned by the return of those he once called kin. The eldest woman's steady gaze held more than greeting. It bore the burden of unspoken history and the weight of promises forged in shadows deeper than this night. No words were needed as she placed her calloused hand firmly on his shoulder, their bond woven not from townsfolk's scorn, but from the land's old truths. Clara could feel the tremor ripple through her chest, the delicate balance of fragile trust and looming peril. Beyond the circle, Dry Creek's eyes narrowed further, their whispers sharpened blade-like by years of suspicion, cloaked in fear. The approaching hoofbeats thundered closer, their rhythm a countdown to an upheaval, threatening to tear apart all that Clara fought to hold together. Suddenly, the quiet shattered. A scout crashed into the encampment, breath ragged, eyes wild, as he gasped words that shot through the moonlit night like a jagged arrow. They're coming. No longer scouts, but hunters. For him, for all of us. That single revelation twisted the air tighter, the fragile peace buckling beneath the gravity of the threat. Clara's husband stiffened. Silence, breaking into a storm of clenched fists and quicksilver movements. His calm resolve splintered, replaced by a fierce fire reserved for warriors who carry centuries of pain behind every glance. Stepping forward, Clara's boots whispered against the dry earth, her voice steady despite the sky's growing violence, cut clean through the dark. Fear cannot unravel what binds us, not tonight, and certainly not here. From the shadows emerged a figure, cloaked in tattered cavalry blue, the uniform worn and tarnished, yet impossible to ignore. His badge glinted dully beneath the lantern's flicker, symbol of authority, accusation, and an unyielding past. His gaze locked onto Clara's circle, sharp and accusing. "You harbor a fugitive," he declared, voice thick with bitter certainty. "That charge doesn't wash away in this town." The night fractured beneath his words. Lanterns flickered. Faces twisted in scorn and fear. Suspicion sharpening like a blade, ready to draw blood. Neighbor turned wary. Friends paused at the edge of harsh judgment. The very ground beneath felt the strain of old wounds reopening. Clara's husband moved between her and the accuser, a living shield carved from years of survival and steadfast honor. His eyes blazed with an age-old defiance, not merely born from anger, but from a fierce protectiveness rooted in history and heartbreak. Around them, the crowd's murmurs swelled, threats and curses riding the desert wind like poison. Then the elder woman raised a trembling hand, her voice slicing through the chaos with the weight of unshakable truth. "He carries the honor of his people, not the sins you cast like stones. Your blindness breeds this hate, but it will not claim us all." Before her words could settle, a sharp crack ripped through the night. A bullet slammed into the dry earth, mere feet from Clara's trembling feet, sending dust spiraling upward like a storm's warning. With it, the fragile veil of restraint shattered, panic exploding into cries, loading rifles rattling, and ruthless shouts. Grabbing her husband's arm, her pulse hammering through her veins, Clara whispered, "We have no time. They're here. We must move, now!" His nod was fierce, resolve hard as forged steel. "Anyone unwilling to stand with us needs to leave before this fire consumes the innocent." From the edge of town, shadows morphed into forms, guns raised, faces grim and unyielding. Clara's eyes flickered back to the elder's steady gaze, the unspoken pact between them tightening like a noose. This was no longer simply a hunt for one man. The war that rippled beneath threatened to engulf every soul in Dry Creek. Suddenly, from the chaos, a small figure darted forward. A boy no more than 10, clutching tight a worn leather pouch pressed close to his chest. His eyes gleamed wild, burning with secrets too heavy for such a small frame. Without a sound, he slipped past soldiers, swallowed by the shadows of the western hills. "The boy," Clara breathed, voice trembling. "He holds the key." Her husband's gaze darkened with ancient knowledge, eyes flickering like coals beneath ash. Tonight, they hunt more than flesh and blood. They hunt our past, the legacy buried beneath years of silence. The cavalry commander barked orders with icy resolve, unaware that the true battle wove far deeper. Beyond his reach, a war of unforgiving history and buried truths. Behind the steady procession of armed men, a darker shadow moved with lethal purpose, silent as the grave, eyes aflame with cold fury. Cloaked in black, this figure carried a secret sharp enough to cleave the fragile hope in Dry Creek and ignite a firestorm none could escape. Clara staggered, breath caught in the tightening grip of dread. In the hush that followed, the distant gunfire and the wind's mournful whisper, she heard it, a voice barely a whisper, twisted with betrayal. "Not all enemies wear the cavalry's blue." The mesquite branches whispered secrets as the night deepened, shadows flickering in restless dance across the cracked earth. Clara's breath caught in her throat, her fingers tightening on the doorframe as the ragged shapes pressed closer under the twisted limbs. The elder's hand remained firm on her husband's weathered shoulder, an unspoken testament to bonds older than towns or grudges. He met that touch with the calm fire simmering just beneath slate-colored eyes, a quiet resistance to the storm gathering beyond Dry Creek's hollowed streets. No words were spoken, but the solemn gravity that hung between them bore the weight of generations, of promises and scars etched into flesh and memory. Beyond the fragile circle of kinship, the town held its breath, nerves taut beneath layers of suspicion sharpened by years of whispered fears. The cadence of horses' hooves thundered nearer, no longer the cautious sweep of scouts, but the relentless drumbeat of hunters closing in. A sudden crack shattered the quiet. Clara's heart leapt as a scout stumbled into their midst, eyes wide as the desert sky, and voice ragged from desperation. "They're coming. The cavalry. They're hunting. For him. For all of us." The words sliced through the night air like barbed wire, twisting the fragile calm into a tense coil of dread. Her husband's jaw tightened. The ancient calm faltered, replaced by a dangerous heat as old as the sun-scorched lands he carried in his blood. Muscles knotted beneath rough skin. Readying for battle, in a dance as old as time, Clara stepped forward, boots crunching lightly on dry earth, and her voice pierced the taut silence. "We will not let fear unravel what we've fought to protect. Not tonight. Not here." From the shadows emerged a man cloaked in faded blue, the tattered sash of a tarnished badge clinging to his chest. His eyes burned with fierce accusation as they closed upon Clara's circle. "You harbor a fugitive," he snarled, voice edged with bitter certainty. "That's a charge no one here can deny." The night fractured beneath his words, Lanterns flickered as faces twisted with scorn and fear. The line between neighbor and foe blurred, the weight of ancient grudges pressing down like a desert sun. Clara's husband moved deliberately between her and the accuser, a living barrier carved from years of survival and unyielding honor. A fierce spark flickered behind his eyes, not anger alone, but a defiant warning seated deep in bones, kissed by betrayal and resilience. The crowd growled low, voices unfurling like venom on a summer breeze, but the elder woman raised her calloused hand to cut through the rising storm. He carries the honor of his people, not the sins the cavalry drags in their wake, she declared, voice sharp as broken glass. Your blindness is the true enemy here. Her words barely settled when the night exploded with the sharp crack of gunfire, the bullet slamming into dust at Clara's feet, scattering earth like shattered hope. Chaos bloomed, screams pierced the darkness, rifles clicked, loading rounds with deadly urgency. Heart pounding, Clara seized her husband's arm, the warmth beneath her fingers a tether in the storm. There's no time. They're here. We must move now. His nod was fierce, resolve hardened by years of silent sacrifice. Those unwilling to stand with us must leave before the flames consume what little peace remains. From the fringes of town, armored figures spilled into the clearing, spurred boots striking earth with grim determination. Clara's gaze met the elder's steady resolve. The unspoken understanding, settling like dusk's first shadow. This was no longer a mere manhunt. It was the eruption of a buried war, one that threatened to swallow Dry Creek whole. Suddenly, a streak of movement caught her eye. A boy no older than 10, clutching a worn leather pouch pressed tight to his chest. His eyes shone wild and fierce, the desperate weight of secrets young shoulders should never bear. Without hesitation, he slipped past soldiers and shadows alike, disappearing toward the yawning silhouette of western hills. "The boy," Clara whispered, breath trembling. "He carries the key." Her husband's face darkened, ancient fire kindling deep within his gaze. Tonight they hunt more than flesh and blood. They hunt the past, the legacy they sought to bury beneath silence. The cavalry commander barked orders, voice cold and unyielding, unaware that the true battleground lay far beyond badges and rifles, tangled in the ghosts of promises broken and truths denied. From the darkness beyond, a figure slipped forward, a shadow draped in blackened cloak and deeper intent. His eyes burned with a ruthless hunger, intent sharpened by years spent stalking vengeance. In silence, he moved like death's own specter, bearing a secret that could unravel the fragile hope clinging to Dry Creek's cracked soil. Clara staggered, breath catching, as the weight of that hidden darkness pressed down like a suffocating storm. The night had ceased to be mere shadow. It had become a living nightmare, poised to consume them all. And then, beneath the howl of distant gunfire and the desert wind's mournful sigh, a whisper cascaded into her ear. A voice edged with ice beneath the blood-soaked dust of a valley betrayed. Some betray not with gunfire or blade, but with the cold silence of those closest to you. The mesquite branches swayed gently as the last embers of twilight dissolved into the night, the air thick with the scent of sage and distant smoke. Clara's eyes, wide and unblinking, still clung to the narrow sliver of darkness beyond her door. A threshold now alive with the unexpected weight of old ghosts come to stand beneath the skeletal trees. Her pulse hammered in her throat, caught between a flicker of fragile hope and the nagging coil of dread, tightening like a noose. Her husband's silhouette remained a tense shadow beside her, muscles taut, jaw clenched, as if holding back a storm long confined. The touch of the elder woman's rough hand on his shoulder had stirred something buried deep, a thread unraveling between past and present. His lips moved silently in the language of his ancestors, words heavy with the burden of history and calls to hidden kin. Clara caught the low cadence, like the rhythm of the desert wind whispered through. Canyon walls, a summons few outside their circle could understand. Outside, the town's simmering suspicion simmered into a growing urgency. Lanterns flickered behind shuttered windows and on sagging porches, faces twisted into hard lines, eyes sharp knives of mistrust, slicing through shadows. The murmuring crowds had not come for a greeting. They came for confrontation. Yet what pressed against Dry Creek's fragile peace tonight was more than the fears they nurtured. It was a summons to reckonings from another time. A sudden crack shattered the quiet. A scout burst from the darkness, his breath ragged and eyes wild with terror. "They're coming," he gasped, voice raw as the cracked earth beneath his feet. "The cavalry, they're no longer just seeking, they're hunting. For him, for all of us." His words unfolded like a long-dreaded storm, dark and sudden, unraveling every thread of hope Clara had dared weave. Her husband's steady gaze fractured, the ancient calm beneath his surface splintering into sharp, coiled tension. Muscles tightened beneath his weathered skin, readying for a fight without surrender or apology. In that fleeting moment, the weight he bore, the secrets he shielded, became painfully clear. The past was not buried. It was alive, burning bright with threat and memory. Clara stepped forward, boots crunching softly but firmly on the dry dirt. Her voice, though steady, betrayed the tempest roiling beneath. "We cannot let fear unravel what holds us together. Not tonight, not here." Every word was a fragile tether, reaching across the widening gulf between suspicion and survival. From the shadows, a figure materialized, worn cavalry blue hanging heavy on a broad frame, the star of a tarnished badge catching flares of lantern light. His eyes burned with cold accusation as they locked onto Clara and the circle of visitors hewn from desert resilience. "You harbor a fugitive," he growled, voice thick with unforgiving certainty. "A charge no one here can overlook." The night shattered beneath his words. Faces hardened, whispers erupted into murmurs of accusation, suspicion sharpening like edged steel, pointing to fracture a fragile truce. Neighbors exchanged wary glances, decades of fear pulling tightly at their tongues. The noose of history tightened its grip around Dry Creek's throat. In the heartbeat following, Clara's husband stepped forward, an unyielding barrier between her and the storm of judgment. His eyes blazed with a flame older than the red dust beneath their feet. Not anger, but a fierce, ancient warning carved from the bones of his people and the scars of betrayal. Around them, the crowd's low rumble twisted into threats, a chorus of voices drunk on fear and hatred. Then, through the swelling tide of suspicion, the elder woman's voice cut sharp and clear. He carries the honor of his people, not the sins long wielded as weapons by those who hunt in blue. Her gaze stoic, unshaken by the hostile eyes pressing in. Blindness to truth is the enemy here. Her words barely settled when a gunshot tore through the night, a searing crack that sent a plume of dust swirling at Clara's feet. The fragile calm shattered like glass. Panic erupted. Sharp cries shattered the silence. Rifles snapped cocking rounds. Hurried shouts mingled with the chaos of a town waking to war. Gripping her husband's arm, Clara felt the rough fabric of his sleeve under her trembling fingers. "There's no time," she urged, voice barely a whisper amidst the storm. "They're here. We have to move, now." He nodded, fierce and resolute. "Those unwilling to stand must leave. This fight will leave no ground unscarred." From the edge of town, the cavalry poured forward, faces grim, guns drawn, boots pounding the earth with iron certainty. Clara's eyes flickered to the elder woman, an unspoken pact burning in their shared gaze. This was no longer the hunt for a man. It was a war threatening to consume the soul of Dry Creek. Suddenly, a flash of movement. A boy no older than 10, clutching a worn leather pouch close to his chest. His eyes were bright embers of desperation and fierce hope. Without hesitation, he darted past. Armed men, swallowed by the darkness of the western hills. "The boy," Clara breathed, heart tightening. "He holds the key." Her husband's eyes darkened with ancient fire, wisdom born beneath endless suns. Tonight, they seek more than flesh and blood. They hunt a past buried beneath silence. The cavalry commander barked orders, voice steel and ice, blind to the deeper shadows tightening their noose. Behind the advancing soldiers, a darker presence stirred, a figure cloaked in black, eyes cold and merciless, moving like a phantom with a secret sharp enough to cleave Dry Creek's fragile hope. Clara staggered back, breath caught in a choke of fear. The night was no longer just alive, it was a living nightmare. And as the distant thunder of gunfire rose and the wind whispered its mournful lament, a chilling voice curled into the dark, frozen in the cold silence between heartbeats. "Betrayal walks among us, not from the enemy's guns, but cloaked closer than any shadow dared." The mesquite branches quivered as the fading light vanished, shadows thickening around Dry Creek's trembling edge. Clara's breath hitched in her chest, fingers gripping the doorframe, as the figures beneath the skeletal trees unveiled themselves with deliberate calm. The weight in the stillness pressed harder, each heartbeat charged with the knowledge that the fragile barrier between past and present was crumbling. Her husband's eyes, once placid pools of guarded silence, now burned with a fierce fire, reflecting the elder woman's steady touch upon his shoulder. The ancient words he had spoken, in the language of forgotten canyons, lingered in the cool night. Invisible threads, weaving a summons neither time nor prejudice could sever. Outside, the town's gaze sharpened, drawn tight around suspicion and simmering fear. Faces emerged behind shuttered windows, lips pulled thin, shadows whispering like dry leaves tossed by a merciless wind. None dared step forward, but all watched, poised on the knife's edge between accusation and curiosity. A sudden pounding reverberated against the cracked earth. The scout arrived as if propelled by desperation, eyes wide with unspoken horror. "They're hunting," he gasped, voice raw and shattered. "No longer shadows on the horizon. The cavalry comes for blood. For him, for all of us." The words struck Clara like a blow, sharp and unforgiving. Her husband's steady facade cracked, muscles coiling beneath weathered skin, a storm gathering behind restrained eyes. The burden of generations pressed down, an invisible flame ready to ignite. She stepped forward into the cool abyss of night, boots steady, but heart torn between courage and dread. We cannot let fear unravel the fragile ties that bind us here. Not tonight, not under these stars. From the darkness emerged a figure draped in tattered blue, the faded badge catching the flicker of lantern light, a harsh emblem of authority and judgment. His gaze sliced through the circle of kinship, razor-sharp and unyielding. "You harbor a fugitive," he declared, voice thick with steel and accusation. "That stain by law no one here can ignore." The night fractured beneath his words. Flickering lanterns cast jittering faces, suspicion sharpening like a blade drawn from ancient wounds. Neighbors shifted uneasily. Trust dissolved into thin strands of muttered curses and wary glances. The past's venom seeped like poison through dry creeks. Dust choked veins. Yet her husband stepped forward, a living wall forged from resilience and honor, eyes ablaze with an age-old defiance. Not fury, but a fierce declaration, carved from the bones of broken promises and quiet strength. The crowd's murmurs swelled, thick with venom and fractured hope. Suddenly, the elder woman raised her calloused hand. Her voice, sharp and unwavering, sliced through the mounting storm. "He carries the honor of his people, not the sins you cast like stones. Your blindness births this hate, and it will not claim us all." Before the weight of her words could settle, a gunshot shattered the night's fragile veil. Dust exploded at Clara's feet. A sharp note of chaos whispered through the air. Panic erupted. Screams ripped the silence. Guns clicked with merciless intent. The web of tension snapped with shattering force. Her fingers tightened around her husband's sleeve, steady in the turmoil. "No time," she breathed. "They're here. We must move." His nod was a silent thunder. Those unwilling to stand must leave before this fire consumes the innocent. From the edges of the town, armored forms emerged, faces grim, rifles poised, boots carving the earth with cold determination. Clara's gaze locked with the elders, a pact forged in unyielding resolve. This war went beyond manhunt. It was a fracture in the soul of Dry Creek itself. A sudden streak of movement caught her eye. A boy no older than 10, clutching a worn leather pouch tight against his chest. His eyes blazed with raw desperation and a secret too heavy for such young shoulders. Without hesitation, he slipped past the soldiers and shadowed paths, swallowed by the western hill's dark embrace. "The boy," Clara whispered, breath faltering. "He carries the key." Her husband's face darkened, ancient fire flickering beneath furrowed brow. "Tonight they hunt more than flesh and blood. They seek our past, buried deep beneath silence." The cavalry commander barked orders, voice steely with brutal certainty, blind to the true war closing in. Behind his regiment, a shadow stirred, a figure cloaked in black, moving with deadly grace and merciless purpose, eyes burning with ice-cold intent. This presence carried a secret raw enough to rend Dry Creek's fragile hope apart. Clara staggered as the weight of that shadow pressed down, breath stolen in a tightening grip of dread. The night was no longer an absence of light. It was a living nightmare, poised to consume everything. And then, carried on the mournful desert wind and fractured gunfire, a whisper curled beneath the roar, silencing her heart. Betrayal does not always come with gunfire. It often wears the face of those closest to you. The night had deepened, the moon a pale witness to the fractures rippling through Dry Creek. The clash between suspicion and understanding, ancient grudges and fragile alliances, had reached its inevitable crescendo beneath the skeletal mesquite. Clara's heart pounded like a war drum within her chest, each beat echoing the gathering storm that threatened to consume everything she held dear. Her husband stood resolute, a sentinel of quiet strength amid the chaos, his eyes alight with a fierce fire born of centuries of pain and perseverance. The elder woman's gaze never wavered from his face. A solemn pact passed silently between them. As the first patrol closed in, rifles leveled and boots crunching the dry earth with unforgiving purpose, Clara stepped forward, her voice steady but edged with the iron of conviction. "We will not surrender to the fear that has haunted this land far too long." "You seek a fugitive," she said, locking eyes with the captain, whose badge gleamed dully in the lantern light. "But what you fail to see is the man standing not in defiance, but in hope. A hope that we can carry more than hatred across these plains." The captain's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, the boy who had fled into the dark hills returned, breathless but determined, clutching the worn leather pouch close to his chest. Wordlessly, he pressed it into Clara's hands. Inside lay a battered, but intact journal and fragments of old treaties, proof that the man she loved was not the outlaw they made him out to be, but a keeper of promises long ignored. Whispers stirred the crowd as the truth began to unfurl like dawn breaking over the desert. The cavalry's hunt was fueled not by justice, but by fear and ignorance perpetuated through lies and shadows of past betrayals. Clara's husband spoke then, his voice low but steady, recounting the truths etched into the pages and lives intertwined, stories of broken promises, shared bloodshed, but also unyielding resilience and a desire for peace. Among the watchers in the gathering crowd, some faces softened, their eyes reflecting years of doubt, now pierced by new light. The elder woman stepped beside Clara's husband, her voice clear and unwavering. "This land bears the witness of all our pain and all our hopes. It is time to bury old hatreds beneath the sands and forge a new path together." The captain's expression cracked, torn between duty and the undeniable weight of the evidence. Slowly, he lowered his rifle, signaling his patrol to do the same, the tension easing like the first breath after a long-held silence. But the night was not yet past its final trial. From the shadows, the cold eyes of the cloaked figure glinted, a whisper of inevitability. As he stepped forward, the crowd tensed once more. Yet Clara's husband met him without fear, a silent understanding, passing between old wounds and necessary reckoning. The man revealed himself not as an enemy, but a messenger of truth from shadows darker than the open desert, bearing knowledge of betrayals that had once threatened to sever bonds forever. His words were harsh, but needed, naming names and deeds that could no longer hide beneath silence. In that moment, the fragile peace of Dry Creek was tempered by the bitter medicine of truth. Clara reached out, grasping her husband's hand, the strength in their joined fingers a beacon amid uncertainty. "We have survived," she whispered, "not because hate did not seek to consume us, but because we chose to face it together." As the first faint light of dawn crept over the horizon, the fires of conflict simmered down to embers. Dry Creek held its breath, the dust settling on a town forever changed, not by violence alone, but by the courage to unveil truth and embrace the possibility of healing. The elders gathered, weaving stories into the freshly etched morning sky, a tapestry of resilience, forgiveness, and hope. Clara's husband, once branded a fugitive, now stood as a bridge between worlds, his legacy no longer one of division, but of unity, forged in the crucible of shared adversity. In the gentle warmth of morning, Dry Creek began to remember something long forgotten, that even in the harshest landscapes, the seeds of peace can take root, nurtured by understanding and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The hunt was over. The past, finally faced, could rest. And from the cracked earth and whispered promises, a new story began. One not of fear, but of belonging, survival, and the unyielding hope that the frontier could one day be home to all who dared to dream beyond its shadows.